Hey, John Sonmez from simpleprogrammer.com. So I got a question about passive income. This is sort of a loaded word. I think a lot of people say passive income, but they don't really mean passive income. But when I talk about passive income, I'm talking about real passive income. So this email says, hi John, my name is Vlad and I'm from Romania. I'm watching your YouTube videos and I subscribe to your channel. I have financial questions which is inspired me from what I've read in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a pretty good book. I recommend it, but it doesn't give you very much. My only problem with Rich Dad, Poor Dad is it doesn't give you actionable items on how to actually achieve the things that it talks about. But it's a good mindset book, so I definitely still recommend it. We have things that produce money, a house that we rent, interest for money at the bank, and things that we spend money on, a car for personal use. What can we do if the things that produce money become things that spend money? We can't rent the house, the interest is negative. We pay to have money in the bank. I heard that happens in some countries in Europe. For example, you said that you have 26 properties that are rented. What can you do if you can't rent part of them? From your experience, what are the most safe sources of passive income? I hope you understand what I mean. Thank you, have a nice day. So, I think this is a fear for a lot of people starting out when they're going to do some real estate investment is, what if I can't rent my property out? And what if I don't get a return on that? Typically, that's not going to be a problem. I mean, I suppose there are certain economic or situations where you could be stuck with a rental property that you couldn't rent out. In which case you'd have to cut your losses and sell it at a loss. But for the most part, that's not going to happen. And the more that you have, the more that you're going to diversify that risk. So you're not going to have as much of a risk. Typically, I rent my rental properties for 10% under market value, so they're always 100% occupied. And as long as you come in with that mindset when you buy a rental property, then I think you're going to be in good shape. If a lot of people buy a rental property and they think, oh, they're actually thinking that they're going to rent it for 10% higher than market value because they think their place is so good, or they're being very optimistic. I tend to be pessimistic when I look at the value because I want to err on the side of thinking that it'll rent for less than it actually can, because that's going to ensure that it's rented out, and it's going to ensure that my calculations, that I'm never going to end up on the wrong end of it, if you know what I mean. So that's what I would say about that. And then as far as passive income, like what are the safe sources of passive income? I've talked about this a lot, but obviously I think that the only real safe source of passive income that makes sense is real estate investment. And it becomes passive when you get a good system in place where you have a property manager that's able to manage that property, and you've made a solid investment where you know that the rent that you're getting is going to more than cover the mortgage and put some money in your pocket, or you have it paid off. So I think that's a good investment. And like I said, it depends on where you're at, in the world, obviously, but you can get usually a pretty good rate of return because real estate has an actual value. It's always going to have a value. People always need a place to live, and people are always going to rent and pay money for that. So I think that's a really good source. There's some other sources of passive income. I suppose if I had like $100 million, I suppose that I wouldn't. And I wanted to be super safe and secure and be totally passive and not have to worry about it at all, I'd probably do something like to invest in TIPS, which are Treasury inflation protected T-bills, basically. So it's a government bond, U.S. government bond, but it's an extremely poor return rate. I mean, you're talking like after inflation, well, that compensates for inflation, but it's like 1% or something like that. So you have to have a lot of millions of dollars to invest there passively and generate income. I think real estate, my average returns on real estate are somewhere between 10 and 20%. So that's a pretty dang good return, pretty hard to beat, and it's mostly passive. So that's why I recommend that. There's obviously other choices that you could choose in between there, dividend yielding stocks, again, the return is usually not that great and you usually have a high risk. For me, as long as you have enough real estate properties and you've got it managed well, there's very little to no risk involved, and you get a decent return on it. So that's what I think is good, smart passive income move. The other possible category I would say that isn't totally passive would be building a business, building some kind of business that can operate with minimal involvement from you. Maybe you can hire someone to run it, or it operates online and you're selling a digital product where it's simple distribution and all you have to do is answer support emails and things like that. It's still not 100% passive, so I wouldn't quite call it passive income, but if you're just looking for ways to make money, to be able to make more money with what you have, investing in creating a business is always a good idea. But you got to think about making it as passive as possible from the beginning. So anyway, Vlad, great question. Thanks for emailing me, and hopefully that you're able to figure out what you want to do. I'm glad that you're thinking this way. It's good that you are. Keep down the road. A good book I'd recommend to you is called The Millionaire Fast Lane by MJ DeMarco. It's a little bit more detailed than Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think it gives you a little bit more actionable advice, so I would definitely recommend you read that book. And if you got a question for me, email me at john@simpleprogrammer.com. And if you enjoyed this video, definitely subscribe. Talk to you next time.